My name is Jocelyn, 32 years old, and on the night of my birthday, I finally realized that kindness can never buy respect from people who only see you as a walking automated teller machine. At 10 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday night, I was sitting alone in my Manhattan design studio, staring at a blueprint that would fund another month of my family's extravagant lifestyle, while my own dinner consisted of a cheap grocery store cupcake. I took a quick photo of that lonely birthday treat and sent it to our family group chat, hoping for a single kind word after 5 years of working myself to the bone to pay for their every whim. Instead of a celebration, my mother Diana replied with a cold text telling me not to use a pathetic cupcake to demand attention because she was currently attending an elite gala. My sister Adrienne chimed in shortly after mocking me by asking if I truly believed a few measly dollars could buy their affection or their presence at my table. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me as I typed, "Don't use that cake to demand things anymore," and "Do you think a little pocket change can buy family love?" into my notes. Without saying another word, I uploaded a second photograph to the chat, which was a legal screenshot showing the immediate revocation of all property authorizations and the permanent freezing of their supplementary credit cards. If you want to discover what happens when a gentle soul decides to take back everything she ever gave, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below to join the journey. The Manhattan penthouse where Mom and Adrian currently reside is actually a massive financial burden that I have been quietly carrying on my shoulders for over half a decade. Every month, $15,000 disappears from my hard-earned savings to cover the exorbitant rent and luxury management fees required to keep that glass fortress above Central Park running. I remember the day we moved in when Mom insisted that a Sterling woman could only breathe properly if she was overlooking the city skyline from at least 40 floors up. For 5 years, I have sacrificed my own personal life, working 18-hour days at the design firm just to ensure the landlord never had a reason to knock on their mahogany door. My life had become a series of spreadsheets and late-night architectural renderings, all serving a lifestyle that I barely had time to witness myself. The quiet hum of my office was interrupted when my best friend Julianne walked in, carrying a small box and 2 cups of coffee. She had been my rock since university, the only person who truly understood the physical toll this family was taking on my health and sanity. Julianne set the coffee down on my drafting table and watched in silence as my phone continued to vibrate with the hateful messages from the family group chat. She leaned over to see Mom's cold remark about my pathetic birthday cupcake and Adrian's mockery of my financial contribution to their happiness. My friend's face tightened with a mixture of pity and rage as she witnessed the people I supported treating me like an unwanted stranger. Julianne didn't say the usual comforting words because she knew that I had reached my absolute breaking GM after years of being their silent benefactor. It was difficult for Julianne to comprehend how Adrienne could be so incredibly selfish, spending thousands on designer dresses while I lived on takeout and caffeine. My sister had built an entire online persona as a New York socialite, posting photos of her expensive lifestyle that was entirely funded by my secret labor. Adrienne would often take my supplementary credit cards to go on shopping sprees at Bergdorf Goodman, claiming that her brand required her to look successful. She never once asked if I could afford the balance or if I had enough left over for my own professional insurance premiums. To Adrienne, my bank account was a bottomless well that she felt entitled to drain whenever a new season's collection hit the runway. She lived in a fantasy world where money appeared by magic, never realizing that every silk scarf she wore represented another night I spent sleeping on my office sofa. As I sat there with Julianne, I couldn't help but recall the countless times Mom had pressured me to take on even more projects. She would sit in her silk robe telling me that I needed to work harder so she wouldn't lose face among her high society friends. Mom believed that maintaining the Sterling name meant never admitting that we were living on the edge of a financial cliff. Whenever I tried to suggest a more modest apartment, she would break into tears and accuse me of wanting to humiliate her in front of the neighbors. She treated my career as an architect, not as a passion, but as a utility designed to keep her vanity fueled and her social calendar full. Every time I looked at her, I saw a woman who valued the opinion of a stranger at a gala more than the well-being of her own daughter. The weight of their arrogance finally became too much to bear, leading me to pick up the phone and contact the building's head of security. I didn't raise my voice or show any sign of hesitation, as I instructed the management to revoke all biometric access for the penthouse unit effective immediately. Julianne watched with a grim smile as I officially requested a complete change of the digital passcodes for the main entrance and the private elevator. I informed the building staff that I would be the only authorized occupant allowed to enter the premises until further legal notice was provided. The realization that they would be locked out of the very palace they used to belittle me brought a cold sense of justice to my heart. Once the security arrangements were finalized, I began to clear my desk, gathering only the essential legal documents and my personal property records. I packed my master architect seal and the original lease agreement, ensuring that every piece of evidence of my ownership was safely tucked away. Julianne helped me carry the last few boxes to my car, her presence providing the silent support I needed to walk away from the chaos I had just ignited. As I locked the office door for the final time that night, the familiar feeling of being a provider vanished, replaced by the sharp, invigorating chill of freedom. I drove away from the office with a mindset that was fundamentally different from the woman who had walked in that morning. The bank was officially closed, and for the first time in 5 years, the only person I was responsible for was myself. Exactly at 8 o'clock the next morning, I stood before the glass-clad skyscraper of the law firm on Wall Street to take the most significant legal step of my life. The cold morning air felt refreshing against my skin as I pushed through the heavy revolving doors, heading straight toward the elevator bank that would take me to the upper floors. I had spent a sleepless night in that Brooklyn hotel room, reviewing every financial document and mental scar that had led me to this precise moment of reckoning. Entering the reception area, I saw a familiar figure waiting for me near the large windows overlooking the harbor. My lawyer, Walter, had managed my late grandfather Arthur's estate for decades and had spent years warning me about the bottomless greed of my remaining family members. He greeted me with a solemn nod, his sharp eyes reflecting a mixture of professional readiness and the personal concern of an old family friend who had seen this storm coming from miles away. Walter led me into a private conference room where several stacks of legal folders were already laid out on the polished oak table. We wasted no time on pleasantries because we both knew that every passing hour allowed Mom and Adrienne more time to drain the remaining liquid assets. I sat down and began the process of signing the formal documents to immediately suspend all non-essential expenditures from the personal trust fund that my family had been exploiting for years. This fund was never intended to be a blank check for designer handbags and gala tickets. Yet that was exactly what it had become under their reckless management. As I pressed my pen to the paper, I felt a strange sense of finality, knowing that the luxury train they had been riding was finally coming to a screeching halt. Walter carefully witnessed each signature, ensuring that the legal wall I was building was impenetrable and fully compliant with New York state law. During the meeting, Walter took a moment to explain the specific protection clauses that my grandfather Arthur had cleverly embedded in the trust decades ago. He revealed that Arthur had anticipated a day when my kindness might be taken for granted, so he granted me the absolute right to revoke all assets if I were ever mistreated or financially abused. It was as if my grandfather was reaching out from the past to provide me with the shield I needed to protect my future from my own flesh and blood. Hearing the legal terminology made the situation feel incredibly real, stripping away any lingering guilt I might have felt about leaving my mother and sister to fend for themselves. "Everything is ready, counselor. I want them to feel the price of making me invisible," I said, as I handed him the final executed page. Walter simply adjusted his glasses and confirmed that the transition of power was now legally absolute and irrevocable. The next order of business was the immediate repossession of the luxury sports car that Adrienne had been driving under her own name but paying for through my accounts. Even though the registration was in her name, the actual financing was tied directly to my professional credit, giving me the legal leverage to terminate the lease effectively immediately. Walter contacted the recovery agency right in front of me, providing them with the GPS coordinates of the penthouse garage and the authorization to tow the vehicle. I could already imagine the look of pure shock on my sister's face when she walked downstairs only to find her primary status symbol replaced by an empty parking spot. It was a harsh move, but Adrienne needed to learn that a lifestyle built on someone else's labor is nothing more than a temporary illusion. After addressing the vehicle, we turned our attention to the high-end fashion boutiques and department stores throughout Manhattan, where Mom and Adrienne held supplementary cards. Walter drafted a formal notification to be sent to every major retailer from Fifth Avenue to Soho, officially canceling all secondary credit lines associated with the Sterling name. I wanted to make sure that the next time they tried to purchase an expensive gown or a piece of jewelry, they would be met with a cold rejection at the register. "Will their cards be declined immediately, Walter?" I asked, needing to be certain that the financial cord had been severed before they could do any more damage. He assured me that the electronic block would be active within the hour, leaving them with nothing but the cash they happened to have in their purses. As I walked out of the law office and back into the sunlight of Lower Manhattan, I felt a massive weight suddenly lift from my shoulders. Looking at the projected figures of the monthly expenses I would now be saving, I realized that I had been carrying a burden of nearly $30,000 in unnecessary debt every single month. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't an unpaid employee of my mother's vanity or my sister's social ambitions. The city around me seemed brighter and the air felt lighter as I realized that my hard work would finally belong to me and me alone. I was no longer a ghost in my own life, and the people who had treated me like a ghost were about to discover just how much they depended on my presence. 3 days after the suspension orders took effect, the perfect facade that Mom and Adrienne had worked so hard to build began to crumble at the most prestigious locations in the city. The first cracks appeared during a high society luncheon at an upscale restaurant where Mom was hosting several of her influential friends to maintain her social standing. When the bill arrived, the waiter returned to the table with a formal expression to inform her that the black credit card under my name had been completely frozen. Mom tried to laugh it off as a technical glitch, but the reality sank in as she was asked to provide an alternative form of payment in front of everyone. She had to endure the stinging humiliation of having one of her guests settle the tab, while the staff watched with polite but judgmental eyes. While Mom was struggling with her public embarrassment, Adrienne received a devastating notification from the organizers of her upcoming fashion showcase. The unit informed her that the significant deposit required to secure the venue and the models had been abruptly canceled due to insufficient funds. Adrienne had been bragging about this launch for months, yet she now faced the prospect of her entire project vanishing before it even started. She tried to contact the agency to negotiate, but they were firm in their policy that no work would proceed without the financial guarantee I had previously provided. Her carefully curated digital world was suddenly under threat because she no longer had the capital to pay the people who created her illusions. The chaos escalated when my sister's fiancé Bennett began to notice the undeniable signs of financial instability within the Sterling household. Bennett was an ambitious stockbroker who had always been attracted to the family's perceived wealth and the connections that came with our Manhattan address. He arrived at the penthouse only to find Adrienne in a state of frantic rage, surrounded by unpaid invoices and formal notices from various luxury vendors. Bennett started asking pointed questions about why the private car service had been discontinued and why the household staff had not been seen in days. The realization that the woman he intended to marry might not be the heiress he imagined caused a visible shift in his usually supportive demeanor. By the afternoon, the family began to receive a barrage of overdue notices from utility companies and the building's management office. Since I had canceled the automatic payment authorizations, the high-speed internet and premium cable services were the first to be restricted. The luxury lifestyle they enjoyed was built on a foundation of my constant oversight, and without my intervention, the basic systems of their home started to fail. They were forced to realize that the lights stayed on and the water ran because I made sure the bills were paid on time every single month. The penthouse that once felt like a palace was quickly becoming a cold reminder of their total dependence on a daughter they had treated with utter contempt. Throughout the day, I received dozens of abusive text messages from Adrian, ranging from desperate pleas to vicious threats regarding my inheritance. I chose to ignore every single notification, keeping my phone on silent, while I focused entirely on a new boutique hotel project for a major client. My silence seemed to infuriate her more than any argument ever could, as it signaled that I was no longer an active participant in her drama. I spent my hours in the quiet library of my new location, enjoying the productivity that comes when you are no longer managing other people's emergencies. It was empowering to realize that my peace of mind was worth far more than the approval of a family that only valued my financial output. Eventually, Mom managed to reach me on my office line, her voice trembling with a mixture of panic and indignant fury. "Jocelyn, what have you done with my card? Do you want to humiliate me in front of my friends?" she demanded without even asking how I was doing. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow breath before giving her the only answer that mattered in that moment. "I haven't done anything, Mom. I am simply learning how to fulfill everyone's request for space," I replied with a calmness that clearly caught her off guard. I told her quite firmly that she and Adrienne should finally learn how to pay for their own extravagant lifestyles before hanging up the phone. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself or apologize for protecting the resources I had worked so hard to earn. That Thursday afternoon, the heavy silence in my design office was shattered by the sudden and unannounced arrival of Mom and Adrienne's fiancé. Diana burst into my private workspace with a face twisted by indignation, while Bennett trailed behind her with a look of calculating concern. Without waiting for an invitation, Mom slammed her designer handbag onto my mahogany desk and immediately launched into a tirade regarding my lack of filial piety. She began using every psychological pressure tactic in her arsenal, accusing me of abandoning my family just to satisfy a petty grudge over a birthday cupcake. Mom spoke about the sacrifices she claimed to have made for my education, despite the fact that my grandfather's trust had covered every cent of my tuition. She paced the room, demanding to know how I could be so cruel as to strip away the comforts that she believed were her divine right as a sterling widow. Bennett stood off to the side, attempting to play the role of the reasonable mediator while carefully observing my every reaction to the chaos. It was clear to me that his primary objective was to probe the situation and see if there was any chance the financial pipeline would be reopened. He spoke in a measured tone about the importance of family unity and the potential damage this scandal could do to Adrienne's social standing in New York. Bennett's concern was entirely transactional, as he knew his own future lifestyle was tethered to the wealth he thought I would continue to provide. He tried to suggest that we could put all this unpleasantness behind us if I would simply restore the credit limits and unblock the penthouse access. I watched him with a cold detachment, realizing that he was just another scavenger trying to protect his piece of a feast that I was no longer preparing. Instead of engaging in a shouting match, I remained seated and calmly turned my computer monitor toward them to display a high-resolution image of an email. This particular message had been sent by Mom to my lawyer Walter exactly 10 months ago, during a time when she thought I was too distracted to notice. In the email, Mom had explicitly admitted that her primary reason for keeping me close was to ensure she had a reliable tool to pay off her massive gambling debts from Atlantic City. She had described me as a useful asset whose only purpose was to fund her addiction and Adrienne's superficial fashion career, without ever asking questions. The raw honesty in her own words was a devastating contrast to the motherly concern she had been trying to project just moments ago. The revelation caused a visible shift in the room as Bennett stared at the screen with a mixture of profound shock and growing contempt for the woman standing next to him. He had been led to believe that the Sterling family sat on a mountain of inherited wealth, not a pile of gambling debts covered by a hard-working daughter. Mom's face went pale as she realized that her secret was finally out in the open, her arguments about family loyalty collapsing under the weight of her own greed. "Are you really going to leave your mother on the street just because of a little temper tantrum, Jocelyn?" she asked, in a desperate attempt to regain control. I looked her straight in the eye and pointed at the glowing screen, refusing to let her hide from the truth any longer. "This email says you only need me to pay for your nights at the Atlantic City casinos, right, Mom?" I asked, with a voice that didn't waver for a single second. The tension escalated when Bennett's phone began to vibrate, and he placed it on speaker to reveal Adrienne's voice screaming from the other end. She was at a boutique in Soho, hysterically demanding to know why her car had been towed and why her cards were still being declined at the register. Adrienne's screams filled my office, but I stepped forward and directly interrupted her through the speakerphone by stating the harsh legal reality of her situation. I told her that every luxury she enjoyed was a gift that I had officially decided to take back, and that her threats would no longer yield any results. Adrienne's voice died away into a shocked silence before Bennett abruptly ended the call, his face now a mask of cold realization about the true state of his fiancée's finances. I decided that the conversation was officially over and pressed the intercom button to summon the building security team to my office. I informed Diana and Bennett that they were no longer welcome on the premises and that any further communication would have to go through Walter's law firm. It was a surreal moment to watch them being escorted toward the elevator by two uniformed guards while the rest of my staff watched in stunned silence. I had finally declared a total termination of all financial and emotional ties with the people who had spent decades treating me like a resource. As the elevator doors closed on them, the air in my office felt cleaner, and the future felt like a blank canvas that I could finally paint for myself. To understand the reason why I am acting so heartlessly today, we need to go back in time 10 months ago when my endurance finally reached its absolute limit. I vividly remember the sterile smell of the hospital room where I spent 3 weeks recovering from severe physical exhaustion. I had been working nearly 20 hours a day to secure a massive architectural contract, all because I needed to earn $200,000 to cover a disastrous gambling loss Mom had incurred. Instead of showing any remorse for nearly killing her daughter with stress, she simply complained that my hospital bill was an unnecessary expense that drained her vacation fund. I lay in that thin hospital bed, realizing that my life was being traded piece by piece just to fuel her irresponsible lifestyle. While I was struggling to regain my strength under the watchful eyes of the nurses, Adrienne never bothered to visit me even for a single afternoon. I later discovered that she had actually stolen my emergency credit card from my bedside table while I was drifting in and out of sleep. Instead of paying for my specialist consultations, Adrienne used that money to fund a lavish tropical getaway to Miami with Bennett. She posted dozens of photos on social media posing in expensive swimwear, while I was hooked up to an intravenous drip in a cold ward. The betrayal felt like a physical weight on my chest, far more painful than the actual illness that had put me in the hospital in the first place. Julianne was the only person who stayed by my side throughout that entire ordeal, bringing me real food and making sure my business didn't collapse in my absence. During one of our late-night conversations, she provided me with undeniable proof that Adrienne had been secretly selling off several pieces of antique furniture. These were priceless heirlooms belonging to my late grandfather Arthur, items that he had specifically intended for me to keep as part of my heritage. Adrian spent all of your hospital money on that Miami trip. Do you still really want to support them? Julianne asked with a look of pure heartbreak for what I was going through. I looked at the photos of the empty spaces in the penthouse and made a silent vow to myself right then and there. That is the last time they will ever be able to deceive me, Julianne. I promise you that. I replied with a clarity I had never felt before. The memory of that Thanksgiving dinner also played a significant role in my decision to finally sever the ties that bound me to their toxicity. The entire family sat at the main mahogany table enjoying a feast that I had personally financed and organized, down to the last detail. However, Mom insisted that I sit at a small auxiliary table in the hallway because I wasn't wearing an expensive designer gown like the rest of them. She told the guests that I was just the help who handled the family finances, effectively making me a stranger in my own home. I sat there eating my dinner in silence, watching them laugh and toast to their prosperity, while I was treated as an invisible servant. It was the moment I realized that no amount of money or sacrifice would ever earn me a seat at their table or a place in their hearts. Throughout that period, Mom continued to use her hollow, sweet words to manipulate me whenever she needed another large sum for her frivolous hobbies. She would call me her good daughter and tell me how much she loved me, but the affection always vanished the moment the bank transfer was confirmed. I began to see through the patterns of her emotional abuse, recognizing that her love was entirely conditional on my ability to provide wealth. Every hug felt like a transaction, and every compliment felt like a calculated move in a game I no longer wanted to play. I stopped believing her lies and started focusing on the cold, hard facts of the financial abuse I was suffering at their hands. During my final week of recovery, I began to make silent preparations for my eventual departure by consulting with Walter in total secrecy. I instructed him to begin the complex legal process of transferring the ownership of the Manhattan penthouse into the name of my private holding company. I wanted to ensure that when the day finally came to leave, I would have full control over the roof over their heads. I spent my evenings reviewing property laws and tax codes, building a legal fortress that they would never be able to penetrate. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, I was no longer the naive daughter who lived for their approval. I was a woman with a plan, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim my life and let them face the consequences of their own choices. 6 days after the confrontation at my office, a formal eviction notice was delivered to the Manhattan penthouse, officially ending the fake luxury of the Sterling family. The building manager personally informed Mom that the lease agreement was being terminated because I had withdrawn all my personal financial guarantees and rental priority rights. Without my signature backing the massive monthly payments, the management had no reason to allow a group of non-paying tenants to occupy their most expensive unit. The reality of their situation finally became undeniable when the building staff disabled their private elevator access, forcing them to use the service entrance like everyone else. I watched from a distance as the golden cage they had inhabited for so long was dismantled by the cold efficiency of New York property law. The collapse of their social world was further accelerated when Bennett publicly announced that he was calling off his engagement to Adrienne. He had spent the last few days investigating the family's true financial standing, only to discover a hollow shell filled with nothing but mounting debts and lies. Bennett arrived at the penthouse not to offer support, but to demand the return of the family heirloom engagement ring he had given her. "Bennett, you can't leave me right now. We are supposed to be getting married soon," Adrienne pleaded while clutching his arm in a desperate attempt to keep her future intact. He pulled away with a look of pure disgust, his eyes scanning the disarray of the apartment that was no longer a symbol of status. "I married a wealthy daughter of the Sterling house, not a parasite who is drowning in debt like you, Adrienne," he replied before walking out of her life forever without looking back. The scene outside the building was one of chaotic desperation, as Mom and Adrienne were forced to hurry their last designer handbags into cheap suitcases. They were being closely monitored by the eviction service workers, who ensured that they only took their personal belongings and none of the furniture I had reclaimed. It was a pathetic sight to see the formerly untouchable Diana Sterling arguing with a mover over the value of a coat, while her world crumbled on the sidewalk. Their movements were frantic and uncoordinated, reflecting the sudden loss of the servants and assistants who had previously handled every minor detail of their lives. They were finally facing the raw, unpolished version of reality that they had spent decades trying to avoid at my expense. Adrienne began screaming my name in the building lobby, her voice echoing off the marble walls in a futile attempt to summon the sister she had so casually discarded. She looked around for someone to blame, but the doormen and staff simply looked away because they were all too familiar with her previous arrogance and mistreatment. The people she had looked down upon for years were now the silent witnesses to her ultimate humiliation, and not a single person offered a hand to help her with her luggage. Her screams were nothing more than background noise to the busy city, a powerless protest against the consequences of her own actions. The influence she thought she possessed had vanished the moment the money stopped flowing from my bank accounts. News of the eviction spread quickly through the upper-class social circles, and neighbors began to whisper the truth about how Diana had treated her only supportive child. The rumors of her gambling debts and the emotional abuse she inflicted on me became the main topic of conversation at the very galas she once attended. Her reputation, which was the only thing she truly valued besides money, was now permanently tarnished in the eyes of the Manhattan elite. People who had once sought her company now deleted her contact information, wanting no association with a woman who would sell her daughter's future for a night at a casino. The social isolation was a far more effective punishment than any legal fine could ever be, stripping her of the vanity that sustained her ego. I stood on the opposite side of the street, quietly watching the moving truck drive away with the last remnants of their stolen lifestyle. For the first time in my entire life, I felt the heavy chains of familial obligation fall away, replaced by a sense of true and absolute freedom. I didn't feel the need to gloat or to witness their suffering up close, because their existence simply no longer mattered to my future. I turned away from the penthouse and started walking toward the subway, ready to return to a home that was paid for by my own honest work. The weight of the Sterling name was finally gone, and I was looking forward to a life where I was finally the primary character in my own story. 2 months have passed since the day I decided to sever that toxic bond forever, and the lives of everyone involved have moved in completely different directions. The grand illusions of the Sterling family have been replaced by the harsh, unyielding reality of a life without my constant financial support. Diana now lives in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in the outskirts of the city, a place far removed from the glitzy streets of the Upper East Side. For the first time in her 60 years of existence, she has been forced to seek employment as a retail clerk at a local department store. Seeing her spend 8 hours a day on her feet to earn a basic paycheck is a poetic justice that no legal settlement could ever achieve. She no longer spends her afternoons at high tea or luxury boutiques, but instead calculates the cost of groceries with a newfound sense of desperation. The downfall of Adrienne has been even more dramatic, as the Manhattan social circles she once craved have turned their backs on her entirely. The major fashion brands and influencers she used to associate with have officially severed all ties to avoid being linked to her financial scandals. Once the truth about her betrayal and the family's mounting debts became public knowledge, she transformed into a social pariah in the very city she tried to conquer. Adrienne spends her days in a small rented room watching as her former friends post about the gala events she is no longer invited to attend. The vanity that once defined her has become her greatest burden, leaving her with a hollow life built on the ruins of her own arrogance. She discovered too late that a reputation built on someone else's money is as fragile as glass and twice as dangerous when it finally shatters. As for my own life, I have moved into a modest but beautiful beach villa in Newport, Rhode Island, where I have finally started my independent design firm. The ocean air provides a clarity that I never could have found in the suffocating environment of the Manhattan penthouse. I spend my mornings working on projects for clients who value my talent rather than my bank account building a business that belongs entirely to me. There is a profound sense of peace in knowing that every dollar I earn will go toward my own future instead of funding a gambling addiction or a superficial wardrobe. I have surrounded myself with people like Julianne, who stayed by my side when I had nothing to offer but my friendship. My new home is filled with light and laughter, a stark contrast to the dark and manipulative atmosphere of the life I left behind. Many people have asked me why I decided to never offer forgiveness or seek a reconciliation with my mother and sister after everything that happened. The answer is simple, yet painful, as the betrayal of one's own flesh and blood creates a wound that is far too deep for time to heal. I realized that their regret was never about the pain they caused me, but rather about the luxury they lost when I finally stood up for myself. To allow them back into my life would be an insult to the version of me that spent years suffering in silence while they exploited my hard work. I have chosen to protect my peace by maintaining a permanent wall between us, ensuring that they can never hurt me or manipulate my emotions again. Some bridges are meant to be burned so that you can never be tempted to walk back into the fire that once consumed you. Diana has made several attempts to reach me through a series of late-night letters filled with late-coming remorse and desperate pleas for a second chance. She writes about how much she misses our family and how she has finally realized the errors of her ways, but her words feel empty and transactional. I receive these envelopes once a week, but I have made it a personal rule to never open them or even glance at the handwriting inside. Instead, I carry them directly to the fireplace and watch as the flames consume the paper without a single second thought or a hint of guilt. I am no longer the girl who can be swayed by sweet lies or hollow promises, as I have finally learned to value my own worth over her convenience. Each letter that turns to ash is a reminder that I have successfully reclaimed my power and my identity from her control. I ended my day by sitting at my new oak desk, looking out at the sunset over the Atlantic Ocean with a serene smile on my face. There is a framed photograph of me and my grandfather Arthur sitting right next to my computer, capturing a moment of genuine happiness from my childhood. I feel his presence in the quiet strength I discovered within myself, knowing that he would be proud of the way I protected the legacy he left for me. I am no longer a ghost in someone else's drama or a tool for someone else's greed, but a woman who is finally free to live her own truth. As the last light of the sun disappears below the horizon, I realize that the greatest lesson I learned was that my own approval is the only one I ever truly needed. The story of Jocelyn is not merely a tale of revenge, but a profound lesson about the necessity of establishing personal boundaries and self-respect. In this life, sometimes the very individuals we call our family are the ones who cause the most significant pain because they know exactly where your weaknesses lie. You should never allow anyone to exploit your kindness and sacrifices under the guise of family ties, especially when they treat your generosity as a mandatory obligation. Your silence and endurance will never be enough to reform greed, as it only serves to make the other person become more cruel and demanding over time. Please be brave enough to sever toxic relationships to protect your soul and the fruits of your hard labor, because you deserve to be loved for who you truly are, not for the size of your wallet. Thank you all for listening to the story of Jocelyn until the very final moment. I truly appreciate your companionship on this journey to reclaim justice and personal peace. What do you think about Jocelyn's decision to completely cut ties with her family? If you were in her position, would you have given your family a second chance? Please share your perspective in the comments section below so we can discuss this together.